Welcome. We're here today with Dr. Steve Malone to talk about science communications and a recent incident, 2009, where I should say miscommunication or inadequate communication led to great consequence both for the people in central Italy near Aquila, a town that was struck by a magnitude 5.9 earthquake, and also the scientists and emergency managers that were gathered to answer questions about the earthquake swarm that was occurring before the big earthquake. With me is Dr. Steve Malone, who has looked into this incident, explained the situation of why these people came together to talk about this earthquake swarm, and how did it end up with a recommendation of folks going home and having a glass of wine and not worrying about it.
Yeah, there have been earthquakes occurring near the town of L'Aquila for several weeks, even minor ones before that. So the population was well aware that earthquakes were taking place. The scientific community knew that this was a very high hazard area, part of Italy, and had put out that information in general terms to the population. But at the same time, there was a technician in a field removed from earthquakes that was studying something called radon, a natural occurring gas that comes from the earth. And he was claiming that variations in that were predicting that a large earthquake was coming. And the time window he gave and the location was actually different than what ultimately happened. But it's well known in the scientific community that radon is not a reliable predictor of earthquakes. It's been studied actually quite extensively. So this brings us to a problem that the emergency management, they call it the Civil Protection Agency in Italy, has, of how to deal with this type of increasing, I wouldn't say hysteria, but concern by the population and the press.
So do you think that the meeting was called primarily to rebuke this prediction of a big earthquake, or was it primarily to warn people of central Italy that their hazard of a big earthquake is increased?
Well, there's some controversy over the reason why it was called, but probably the news reports about this prediction were certainly influential in having this committee, sort of major risks committee of seismologists get together and review the situation. And it was a little different than normally the way these types of committees are called. It was done sort of at last minute. It met actually right in the town where it didn't get a lot of other input involved. There weren't good notes kept. There wasn't a consensus statement that came out of it. They didn't publish that too. And other people were sitting and listening to the meeting. So there was some confusion right there. But at no point did any of the scientists at this meeting claim that an earthquake was or was not going to occur. The main thing is you cannot predict earthquakes. Whether that was the message that got out to the public or not, it's not clear. That indeed was the attempt, but in fact there were some unfortunate statements made by not even an official member of the committee, but somebody sitting in on it, that was from the Emergency Management Committee, that could lead the press and public to think that a big earthquake was not going to occur.
So in that vacuum, reporters were left to kind of pull out quotes from individuals that they're talking to around the meeting, and what was the famous one that got everyone in so much trouble?
Well, what really probably was the thing that people picked up on was a statement made by the emergency management official, that something to the effect that the scientists tell me that the continuing earthquakes are a good thing. They are relieving energy. The implication being that a large earthquake is less likely.
Yeah.
He didn't say it couldn't occur. Statistically, that's really what could occur, but that reportedly let a lot of people do things that they wouldn't have normally done. Now, of course, all that's come out in retrospect after the earthquake did occur, and over 300 people were killed. So it was a terrible disaster.
So what is the time frame here from the meeting to this terrible earthquake that occurred about a week later? And it occurred in the wee hours of the morning, so people were home, and many more casualties perhaps because they were in dangerous buildings that collapsed. Yeah.
And then what happened after that then is what received an awful lot of press, and that was that, first of all, the scientists didn't predict the earthquake, and this technician did. Well, he did notify the public that something, but his window was not where the earthquake occurred. But nevertheless, you can't predict earthquakes, but you can not predict earthquakes.
Right.
So the scientists couldn't say there wasn't going to be one or there was going to be one. You don't know. Officially, it was that they gave misleading statements, inaccurate and misleading statements that caused some of the population to not take the evasive actions they normally would. And it went to trial, and they were convicted. They were convicted to 6 years in prison and a huge fine, and forbidden to participate in any official activities for the rest of their lives. And in the appeal, the 3-judge panel that heard the whole process and all the evidence that had occurred did ultimately acquit the scientists, but left standing the conviction of the Civil Defense Authority, but with reduced penalties. Because he really did give the imprecise and incorrect and misleading statements.
So what lessons should we take from this?
Everybody has some fault in this particular situation of a bit, but no one actually said specifically there wasn't going to be an earthquake and therefore it's okay. They probably didn't follow up properly with giving people the background on it. And when I don't know amongst the seismologists what they would have heard when, but when they heard news reports that this guy was saying that the energy was decreasing because of the swarm of small earthquakes, they probably should have reacted and tried to clarify that and say that that is actually scientifically incorrect. And since this, we've learned a lot and said, okay, we need to study what that is and look at what's called operational earthquake forecasting, in which you look at what the average hazard is over time and how that is modified. Okay. And it can be increases of a factor of 100 increase in hazard. But when you're starting down in one and
right.
several millions, a factor of 100 still makes it a small probability that the earthquake will occur. At the same time, the press is somewhat culpable, even though maybe they didn't have a lot of choices of where to go and get it, in following some of these things that were going on and making a lot of the controversy, the scientists against this technician, and blowing that up. There was another earthquake that evening before the big one, and that under those circumstances in the past, people would go out and sleep in the parks or in their cars rather than in their home. And sometimes that is not an uncommon thing in Italy when they feel earthquakes, is to get out of buildings which there are known to be hazardous. In this case, some people said, oh no, don't worry, the scientists aren't worried, and went back again.
Well, thank you very much for coming down and helping us out here. We're going to solve all of these problems in the workshop this week, so we'll let you know how it goes.
Good luck.
Thanks, Steve.